Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Let's go back to our main story now, the budget. And along with the usual maelstrom of complicated figures, there were measures that will have a more immediate effect on every householder's bottom line. Insurance premiums, wine and cigarettes all get a tax rise, while beer, whiskey and petrol have escaped. But the Office for Budget Responsibility says that the changes to personal independence payments will be the most significant revenue raiser, with 600,000 disabled people losing £4 billion by 2020. So how's it all gone down on the ground? Our social affairs editor Jackie Long reports from Blackburn.
It's northern, but if Blackburn is part of the Chancellor's powerhouse, not everyone here is feeling it. At the local food bank, it's earlier government changes to welfare which are troubling them. They say they're seeing rising numbers of families looking for food because of problems with universal credit. What's happening at Westminster feels totally irrelevant.
Oh, it might as well be on a different planet, truly. It seems totally irrelevant to the day-to-day lives of the people that we see here.
And one of the things that George Osborne has talked about is this idea of encouraging people on low wages to save. I mean, that sounds perfectly sensible, doesn't it?
I don't know what fantasy he's living out by saying that. It isn't something that people here could ever contemplate doing. They've used everything, they've sold everything that had any value, and there truly is no wriggle room for anybody. When they're hungry because there is nothing in the cupboard.
Blackburn and Darwin is one of the most deprived areas of Britain, with almost 14% of working-age people on some form of out-of-work benefits.
Blackburn's hit because it has a particularly high proportion of larger families.
New research by Professor Steve Fothergill says the last few years of welfare cuts have hit Blackburn harder than anywhere else in the country.
We estimate that when those reforms come to full fruition, that's going to take £560 per head, per adult of working age, for every adult of working age, out of the pockets of people here in Blackburn, and that is 3 times as much as in some of the more prosperous parts of southern England.
The point that George Osborne made in this budget and previous budgets is that what he wants to do is get people back to work. This shouldn't be about benefits anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a laudable aspiration to get people back to work, but in order to do that, you've got to rebuild the economic base of communities. Now, you don't do that by simply, giving rate relief to corner shops and hairdressers. They only recirculate money that's already in the economy. What you've got to do is rebuild the base of bigger enterprises that sell to the rest of the country and indeed to the rest of the world. And I didn't see much in the budget that's going to do that.
We're making the Northern Powerhouse a reality and rebalancing our country.
This is part of the new Blackburn. The council wants to be part of any northern powerhouse, not perhaps convinced George Osborne has towns like Blackburn in mind.
It's important, I think, that the Northern Powerhouse is seen not just in terms of Manchester and Liverpool and the routes in between, but there are places like Blackburn, Burnley, Preston who are all changing.
And in town, few felt the budget had much to do with them.
Well, it's always the same, isn't it? They're just for their own people, really, the ones with the money.
The fuel is quite important, so I'm glad that's staying as it is. And the sugar thing, I'm expecting a child, so that's quite important.
I go to work and I do my job and I come home and I pay my taxes and stuff, and I don't really listen to the news.
So the budget passed many by here, in a town where few seemed convinced by the Chancellor's promise today no one would be left behind.
Well, I'm joined now by Labour's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Seema Malhotra. So you've been criticising George Osborne for borrowing too much. So what spending would you have cut, or what taxes would you have raised instead?
Well, I want to go back one step to this budget. This was a budget absolutely a failure, and I think your interview with Sajid Javid suggested a real complacency.
Okay, but can you just answer that question, because that's the question I'm putting to you. We don't have that much time. What spending would you have cut?
We are opposing the corporation tax cut to 17%, and we have opposed his cut as well to 18%, 19% before.
Right. Would you also oppose the so-called middle-class tax cut, raising the 40%?
But we have not opposed that. We have said that we will support that change, so we would not have done it at this time. What is clear is that this is a budget where we have seen growth come down or be revised down. We've seen productivity revised down. We've seen exports now being revised down. We have seen household debt being revised up.
Okay,
this is a budget.
Let's talk about you're in the studio to talk about your plans
as well as
as well as criticise the government. Talk about your plans. You've named one tax that you oppose, their tax cut that you oppose, but where else would you get the money to balance the books as you want to do?
This today is about George Osborne's decisions, and I think
but it's also about your decisions.
But it is about George Osborne's decisions. What we said is that there are three things, three tests that we would set, whether this was addressing the issues of failure, like on housing and on his growth targets, whether it was going to be a fair budget, which it clearly isn't if you're seeing that the bulk of what he is raising and saving is coming from the backs of the disabled, but also whether it was going to be investing for the future. We have not seen any evidence
We've put all of those questions to the government. What I'm asking you is, if you want to balance the books on a day-to-day basis, as you say you do, how do you do that in terms of raising taxes or cutting spending? Which would you do?
Well, we said very clearly that we would want to see taxes come through growth. And what we have said is you would want to see investment. But you have to ask the question as well, Kathy, why are we seeing public sector net investment fall from 1.9% to 1.4% of GDP? You are not investing for growth. You cannot cut your way to prosperity. We have argued, and we will continue to argue, that this was not a budget based on growth and fairness. This was a budget based on George Osborne's political interests.
Okay, but the OBR has just downgraded the growth forecast. So if you came in, if a Labour government came in, you would have to raise taxes, would you? Would you prefer to raise more taxes than rather cut the spending?
If you look closely at what the OBR said, the OBR said that the reason why they were downgrading growth is because they're downgrading UK productivity. Productivity arises when you've invested in skills, you've invested in infrastructure, you've invested and supported businesses investing. Why would the British Chamber of Commerce say something like it was time for George Osborne to make a real-world impact, not a media impact?
This is all fair enough to put to the government, but I'm asking you how you balance the books, and I'm still none the wiser.
We are saying, and we've said this very clearly, if you see growth from investment, and it's very clear that that's what happens when you invest in infrastructure, when you invest in green energy skills and development, or research and development, you get growth in tax receipts.
Okay.
And we would also tackle tax avoidance far more effectively.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Seema Malhotra, thank you very much for joining us.
I've been getting